Nearing sunset in the Sunshine State as the monster Hurricane Milton will soon make landfall. That's topping the hill on NewsNation tonight. A live look right now along the Gulf Coast. At this moment, Hurricane Milton's outer bands are whipping across the western part of Florida. A Category 3 storm at this moment with sustained winds of 120 miles per hour. Landfall along the Gulf Coast expected this evening, most likely in or right around that area between Tampa Bay and Sarasota, with Milton then expected to travel across the state of Florida, roughly 150 miles as a hurricane the entire time. 15 counties with more than 5 million people in them are under mandatory evacuations at this hour. Some 6,000 National Guard troops, 50,000 linesmen are stationed in Florida tonight to respond to the impending catastrophic damage. And already today, tornadoes that could be seen for miles across southeast Florida ahead of Milton, which will strike the western part of the state tonight during darkness. Thanks for being with us here on the Hill. I'm Blake Berman. Our coverage continues here on NewsNation. Alex Capriello is live this evening for us tonight in Sarasota, but we begin with Brian Enton, who is in Tampa for us this evening. Brian?
Hey, Blake. Yeah, it's really starting to come down here in Tampa. I would say in the last 30 minutes or so, the conditions seem to have gotten much, much worse as these kind of bands come through. It gets really windy and really rainy for a little bit, and then it sort of clears for a second, and then we'll get another squall that comes through. We're on Bayshore Boulevard, if you know Tampa. Like, this is where Gasparilla starts. And if you look out here at the bay, you can see, I mean, normally you'd be able to see buildings and you'd see the other side. You can't see anything right now. It's interesting as the wind sort of shifts. At one point it seemed like it was pulling the water out, and now it seems like it's pushing the water, and there's a jogger, actually. Look at this. Wow. The Florida man right there for you, Blake, jogging in the hurricane. Look at the trees, though, Blake, and you can see how windy it is. Again, it's coming through right now. Everybody's just waiting to see how close is the center is this storm going to be to Tampa. Is it going to go a little north of Tampa, which would be a really good thing for Tampa? Wow, it's getting pelted now. Or is it going to go south, which would be much worse in terms of the storm surge here? So this is it. It's coming on shore. It seemed like it was picking up speed a little while ago, so we may get a landfall sooner than we thought. All right, I want to throw it over to Alex Capriello. He is just a little bit to the south of where I am in Sarasota. What are you seeing there, Alex?
Yeah, hey, Brian, we are really seeing conditions pick up down here in Sarasota just within the last 30 minutes to an hour. These really powerful wind gusts, some that I really got to brace for because it's really coming right at my face. You can see this storm surge, which they were predicting 10 to 15 feet, already begin to rise. It wasn't only a few hours ago that really there was a foot of water, foot of space before this water, and now here it is beginning to crest over. It's up to my boots here. When you take a look at these wind gusts here, look at these palm trees that are pushing to the side. Really, the force of this storm is beginning to show here in Sarasota. We do know that it's barreling towards the western coast of Florida, expected to make landfall within the next few hours. And most certainly right now, if you could tell just the power of this wind, it really has the opportunity to pick up debris and other, vegetation that's here on the ground. I wonder whether or not branches like this, most certainly remaining from Hurricane Helene. There goes my hat. We wonder if whether or not, let's see that vegetation, look at that tree limb. This is the type of projectiles that they really worry about here with this incoming hurricane. Blake, we're going to take some shelter, get on the other side of the building.
Yeah, please
and hopefully wait this one out.
Alex Capriello, Brian Enton, both of you stay safe this evening. You can see sort of the subtle differences there as the bands come through. They're not far from each other, just miles away. But you can see there how just a few miles, a few moments, a few minutes, it can be different one place compared to the next. All right, looking live right now, the other side of the state. This is in Miami, where Florida residents are struggling with empty pumps at gas stations all across the state there as they ride out the storm. This is one of the ongoing themes going into this evening. According to Gas Buddy, 59% of gas stations in the Tampa-St. Pete area are completely out of fuel. About 25% of gas stations all across the state, when you take the state into consideration, out of gas as well. The Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announcing earlier today the state has not run out of fuel overall. There's still 1.6 million gallons of diesel, 1.1 million of gasoline on hand. But that part of the storyline this evening. All right, Hurricane Milton. Category 3, 120 mile per hour sustained winds. Here's where we are right now. So this is the cone of really anywhere it can land, and we've really zoomed in. So this is where Alex and Brian were just reporting from. If this continues right along the track, again, the next 5-6 hours or so when we get landfall, you're probably looking at a direct hit in Tampa Bay. But remember, the right side of the storm, in any storm, is the dirty side. That's where you get the stronger winds, the tornadic activity, because storms spin counterclockwise. So as it goes like this, it's this area, basically Fort Myers, Port Charlotte, and north of that area, south of Sarasota, that could potentially get the worst of it, even though landfall could be in this region. Let me show you some of the flooding risk, because that's going to be, of course, one of the other storylines here. Flooding. So if Milton goes in this direction, you basically have Orlando right here. In this direction, you could get flooding to the north, flooding to the south. And of course, as it crosses the state, you are going to get widespread power outages. It's this area in here. There's 8 counties along the coast over some 300 miles that had mandatory evacuations, 13 counties on the west coast, 2 up here in the northeast. But then there's, of course, the storm surge, potentially up to 15 feet. Let me just give you sort of a visual here as to what that looks like. So 3 feet, basically, I don't know, go to your knees or a little above it, that's 3 feet. 6 feet, you're above the front door, right? If it gets to that. 10 feet, you're up to the second story of a house. Anything beyond that, you're approaching the windows. So that's the storm surge, but also keep in mind, when you're talking about 120 mile per hour sustained winds, you get gusts much higher than that. So all it takes is one rock, one projectile, something to go into a window. And then once you got, hurricane winds spinning through your home, through your business, through your shopping center, wherever, that is one of the many, many issues. We are already seeing damage in areas throughout the state of Florida. Some of that damage, as I mentioned, is from multiple tornadoes touching down earlier today in the eastern part of the state. Let's get the latest on the expected path and strength of Milton from meteorologist Max Saparis, NewsNation meteorologist. You can see some of the activity here throughout the day. Max, let's start with Milton, though, tonight. One of the remarkable things about this is you're going to get a major hurricane on the west coast. It's going to move 150 miles or so all across Florida, and then you're going to get a hurricane on the east coast as well.
Right. This is going to cut right across the state, but whoever's near the center of this storm going to have life-changing impacts, especially on the west central coast as this makes landfall here, Blake. Lots of tornadoes touching down. I just checked at least 20 reports. You can see here on our Doppler radar over the last hour where those reports indicated. The tornado warnings are hugging the east coast of Florida right now. That band should move offshore here, and we're putting that threat at least away here in the near term. Look to the left, though. This is the center of the circulation that we've all been waiting for. The eyewall here, which we've been indicated by the National Hurricane Center, is at its worst on the north side, which would be the Tampa side of this storm if it continues on its current path. Again, we still have some wiggle room for a wobble here or there, but losing time as this continues to race to the northeast at 15 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center also expecting a slowdown. They haven't seen that yet, but the models are indicating that, which could cause a turn to the right, or we still could see this right on top of Tampa. Category 3, 120 mile per hour winds. We have that tornado watch till 9 this evening for much of the peninsula south of Orlando. Let's get to that path. Notice it's not a straight line. It has some wobbles back and forth. That's why we could still see a little bit of a shift left or right. How about the cone? Still encompassing most of Pinellas County as far north as around Clearwater, all of Tampa, and down through Sarasota. What that means is the center of the storm, even though they do their best to forecast right through the middle of where that's going to happen, could be as far to the left as Pinellas, as far to the south as Sarasota, making landfall as a Category 3, winds possibly above 110 miles per hour. And there you go, as Blake was saying, still hurricane strength farther inland, and that's why we have all those warnings. I want to end on this storm surge, though. Again, serious threat. 9 to 13 feet is the updated forecast now for the worst of it, mainly south of Tampa Bay. So that's a good sign for Tampa Bay, but still not in the clear yet, with 6 to 9 foot storm surge possible there. And Blake, I got to say, personal for me. I got a lot of family in the Tampa Bay region. It's too late for them to evacuate. They weren't under any mandatory evacuations, but now it looks like that eyewall on the worst of the winds could hit them. What we're being told from the Hurricane Center is this moves ashore. If you are in that eyewall, if you start hearing those winds really howl, get to the most interior room of your house that doesn't have any windows. And if you do have a mattress, maybe putting that above you. Again, if the worst were to happen and you were to get debris coming at you, that would be the best way to protect you. So it's pretty much the same precautions you were taking in an actual tornado, as these are going to be tornado strength winds. Again, 120 miles per hour is what we're expecting sustained at the center of this.
Max, back to those tornadoes for a second. Obviously, with any hurricane, you have tornadic activity, and much of that of Florida right now is under a tornado warning in many of the counties. This was the scene earlier today, though, on the eastern part of the state, southeast Florida. How did we get that earlier today, and how worried are you, concerned tonight about tornadoes, no matter where they might form in Florida?
So as we started the day off, there was an increased risk of tornadoes compared to what a normal hurricane looks like. This is an elevated threat, and that's because of the massive size of the storm and, again, the quick rotation as well. So, I mean, about a dozen or two tornadoes already reported. We have a couple more warnings on the east side of the state. That should exit, but again, that watch, the threat for the tornadoes, as I zoom this back out, does go till 9 p.m. for everyone south of the I-4 corridor. The exception is going to be closer to the center, but we're putting that tornado threat away closer to the center of the storm, and then actually having to deal with those straight line winds that, again, could be as powerful as a tornado too. So a devastating situation near the center of the storm system, though, again, we're feeling impacts far and wide through those feeder bands across the state.
Max Paris, NewsNation meteorologist. Max, best of luck to your family tonight, and of course to all of those, your friends, your family, and of course those in that area. Max, thank you. We were supposed to go live to Congressman Greg Steube. He represents that area, basically from Lehigh Acres all the way up to Sarasota. As you might imagine, there's a bit of reception issues right now all across Florida. If we get Congressman Steube back, he'll be here on the Hill. Joining me, though, now, Chris Steyerwalt, host of The Hill Sunday, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Julia Manchester, national political reporter for The Hill. It was interesting to hear Max, Julia, say that, his family there. I'm from Florida, born and raised. You're from Florida, I believe, born and raised there. And for so many, this storm is personal. Whether you live there or have family there, family from the Northeast, from the Midwest who lives there as snowbirds, so on.
It is. Actually, my parents are in the Northeast right now. My dad had to fly down for a day just to make sure all of the furniture was inside. They live on the East Coast of Florida. So, they're going to be impacted in some way, but it's not going to be the direct hit. I grew up in Orlando, Florida. It's Central Florida, a very inland city, obviously. So it has a bit of a unique, I guess, experience with hurricanes. When you get hit on the coast, it's obviously the strongest. But once it starts to move inland, these storms start to lose steam. At the same time, though, for inland areas like Orlando, there's a very high risk of flooding, downed trees, power outages. I remember in 2004, it was Charlie, Francis, and Jean kind of all in a row came over Orlando. Much of downtown Orlando, communities north of downtown Orlando, really impacted by that flooding, downed trees, power outages. It's a big impact.
It's so interesting you say that because you talk about 2004. I remember in 2000, and it was either 7 or 8, FGHI, Faye, Gustav, Hannah, Ike. They all went up the East Coast, and thankfully they basically grazed or missed and weren't powerful. But Chris, this is a reminder of what can happen. You now have a Category 4 Helene that ripped through parts of the Southeast and devastated community after community and state after state. Tonight, you have Milton in Florida, which is going to go across 150 miles in Florida. There's lots of questions, obviously, about FEMA and the government response and so on and so forth. We often dunk on the folks in the building behind us. But tonight is really one of those nights that highlights what government does and when you need them the most.
Well, I don't even want to think about what year you graduated from high school because
2002.
I knew it would make me feel old. You didn't have to say it. You're just making me feel old. Yeah. But think about the increased population in Florida since 2002. Yeah. Since the turn of the century, right? So Florida is now bigger than New York. It's politically important. It is densely populated and growing. So every hurricane season now, America looks at Florida, which is this now massive and economically significant state, and take this huge interest in Florida. I watched Ron DeSantis today give a press conference, and I got to tell you, he was good. He was really, really good. And I wondered if there weren't some Republicans who are out there watching this and thinking, I wonder what this presidential election would look like. Because DeSantis and Jeb Bush said it on Twitter, but like recognizes like. This is a moment where in Florida, people ask, why is Rick Scott favored to win his Senate race down there? Because Floridians, Republican and Democrat, think that he did a good job when he was governor of Florida dealing. What's the number one test if you're the governor of Florida? Hurricane season. Yeah. Can you do it? Can you get it done? And Ronnie D looked really good up there. And I bet that will help him in the long run.
Chris Steyerwalt, Julia Manchester, stay by. You'll be back later here on the show. Coming up still here on The Hill, we continue our coverage of Hurricane Milton, inching closer to landfall along the Florida coast. You're looking live right now at Tampa. It is quite possible that area, Tampa and Tampa Bay, will be landfall. The Hill on NewsNation. Back in a few, our reporters all across Florida as we continue. All right, welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation as we continue our live coverage this evening as Hurricane Milton, a Category 3 with sustained winds of 120 miles an hour, gusts much higher than that, expected to hit in the Tampa Bay, St. Pete, Clearwater area, potentially with direct landfall, if not maybe a little south of there later this evening, sometime around midnight. Joining us right now is Congressman Greg Steube, who represents Sarasota, areas to the south as well. I mentioned we were having a few reception issues with the congressman, completely understood as this storm is bearing down on where he is this evening. Congressman, thanks for being with us here on The Hill. Your main message tonight is what?
Well, now, we're beyond the evacuation stage. If people are there, they need to shelter in place. The eye of the storm should be hitting Sarasota probably in the next hour or so, based on my looking at the radar. So the storm surge is probably going to be south of us. So that's good news for Tampa Bay. That's bad news for my district and south of my district. So, we're having power. We don't have power where I'm at right now. We're rolling on a generator. Lots of people in Lombo Key down to Boca Grande in my district are without power. So that's going to take some time because we still have linemen in the north part of the state responding to Hurricane Helene. So we've got 50,000 linemen staged to respond as soon as the storm clears, which will probably be like later tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, you mentioned the linemen. I was going to ask you, Congressman, I'm guessing nothing gives anyone comfort, and I know this from having been through a storm. Nothing gives you comfort in a moment like this. But with 6,000 National Guardsmen stationed in Florida this evening, 50,000 linemen there for when the power is either out or about to go out here in the upcoming hours, does that at least give you some sense of not relief, but of, okay, we're on top of this heading into the storm, or do you fear that's not enough?
Well, it helps because now you have manpower when you can go back out. The challenge is if people didn't abide by the evacuation orders and they decided to stay in Lombo Key with a 10 to 12 foot storm surge, law enforcement can't go out right now. We have over 45 mile an hour sustained winds right now. We're coming into over 100 mile an hour winds. Law enforcement's not going to be able to respond to you until after that. So we have, in my district, I know I've got 400 National Guard members at Riverview High School that are staged there. So yeah, the manpower is great, but they cannot go out safely until this storm passes us. And that's the challenge with people not abiding by these evacuation orders and thinking they can stick it out. You can't stick out a 12 to 15 foot storm surge if you're on the coast. So hopefully these are going to be rescue missions and not finding people that have passed because their homes got flooded. But we definitely have the resources on the ground to be able to respond quickly.
Congressman, what do you fear that you're going to wake up to tomorrow?
Well, here's the blessing. The blessing is we were a Cat 5, and now we're a Cat 3. That's much better than what we were looking at. The storm surge, I think, is probably going to be south of us based on the eye. But hopefully people abided the evacuation orders after what we saw in Helene. If you got flooded in Helene, you're going to get flooded in this storm. So hopefully people abided by that, and we're not going to have catastrophic loss of life. I do think we're going to have catastrophic devastation on our coastal communities.
Congressman Greg Steube from the Southwest Florida area, we thank you for joining us this evening, and stay safe tonight. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you.
You got it. All right, Ryan Bass now is in St. Petersburg. As I mentioned, we don't know exactly where landfall is going to be made, but you can see the gusts there behind him. Ryan, what are you experiencing right now?
I'll tell you what, Alex. We're starting to experience this hurricane force winds that are coming to us. I'm going to try to fly back a little bit here to the winds that are really gusting through downtown St. Petersburg right now. My photographer, Greg, can pan over. Look at that bike lane end sign. It is just being carried by these Hurricane Milton, hurricane force winds right now here through downtown St. Petersburg at Albert Whitted Airport, which is about half a mile from where we're joining you right now, a quarter of a mile. They actually just measured a wind gust of 66 miles per hour, and that's only going to increase in areas like downtown St. Pete right here, where we're starting to feel a lot of those hurricane force winds. We saw when we joined you out a little bit earlier ago in some of our early shows here on NewsNation, the water in terms of how strong the surge was from these wind gusts from Hurricane Milton. It's only going to get stronger and stronger as the night goes on and as we get closer to 8 o'clock and into the evening hours. Alex, we're safe underneath one of these parking structures here in downtown St. Petersburg a little bit, but I will tell you, we have felt continually these massive wind gusts that keep coming through, and this is what it's going to be like for hours now as Hurricane Milton nears landfall here on the western coast.
Ryan Bass, if you couldn't hear what he said, you could obviously hear what he is dealing with as those winds, and keep in mind, these are the outer bands right now, as those winds, those hurricane force winds, start to move into the Tampa-St. Pete area. Ryan, if you can hear me, seek shelter. Stay safe, sir. And thank you for joining us here on the Hill. Our coverage continues on the other side of the break. Hurricane Milton, Category 3 storm, bearing down, as you see there, on the western part of Florida. All right, welcome back. Our coverage continues here on the Hill on NewsNation. Hurricane Milton, Category 3. As you can see there, bottom right of your screen, about to make landfall in Florida. Alex Capriello, Brian Enton are both in the middle of it all. Alex Capriello is in Sarasota right now. Alex, when we left you half an hour ago, you were starting to get some of those outer bands. What are you feeling and seeing now?
Yeah, my goodness, last time you saw me, we were really going up against those really windy gusts, so much so it made my hat fly off. We had to seek a little bit shelter. We came about 200 yards inland, and now we're feeling a different picture. Yeah, we're still feeling that wind. You can see in the palm trees here that they really are picking up some of those gusts, but we're also seeing some of this inland flooding. This is not from storm surge, Blake. You know, we're predicting somewhere between 10 to 15 feet of storm surge here in the Sarasota area. This is simply just rainfall collecting in low-lying areas, but this is a downtown area, Sarasota. There are businesses, there are restaurants, and you can see and you can imagine that when this storm surge does crest over those curves and starts making their way here, how much more this water is going to elevate. Really puts it into place here for you. But yeah, in terms of the elements, it's these rain bands that are on this outer edge of this hurricane that are coming and hitting me in the Sarasota area. It'll be really strong, powerful gusts and downpours for 1 second, and then all of a sudden it'll be quiet. You get a sense of safety and a sense of calmness, and then once again it'll pick right back up. So right now we're in that middle ground, but of course seeing some of that rapid flooding in this low-lying areas. We're waiting to see whether that storm surge turns out to be as high as they were forecasting. But yeah, we found a little bit safer ground here inland. We're going to continue surveying this area and try to find more safety and more things to show you about the power of this hurricane. Blake?
Alex Capriello live in Sarasota. Alex, thank you. Now over to Brian Enton, who is in Tampa this evening. Brian, I can't help but think you've covered dozens of these storms in Florida. Your photographer, Luis Abad, who is with you, has covered dozens of these storms, these major hurricanes in Florida. What's the sense that you're getting from the area that you are in and the people that you are speaking with and how they feel that this one is different?
Yeah, and Luis, my photographer, used to be your photographer, by the way. So he says hi, Blake. He's really loving this experience, by the way. But no, it's I think because of Helene, people just felt more on edge this time. I mean, I showed you yesterday all the debris that's been around. I can't even imagine, like out in Gulfport where we were yesterday, what that must be like right now with all the debris probably floating around. So that makes it different. And I think people were just on edge because of that, and also the possibility that this could have been the big one for Tampa, which they're still not out of the woods yet. It's looking better than it was, say, yesterday. But it's these gusts have been strong. The rain has been intense. You look at it out here over the bay. We're kind of in a little bit of a lull right now. I want to show you right here. There's this sailboat, Blake. There's this guy, Lieutenant Dan, that's gone viral on social media. He's in there right now. I see his little light on in there. But everybody's been begging this guy to leave. The mayor came out here. The police chief came out here. And he won't leave. So he came out a little while ago. He stuck his head out. But everybody's been trying to kind of keep an eye on him. Obviously, it's a terrible idea for him to stay on the sailboat right now. But for the most part, people have evacuated. I haven't seen, we had the one guy running by in our live shot earlier with you. But besides that, it's pretty much been a ghost town, Blake.
When do you plan to go inside, Brian? Like, you're on the ground there. Obviously, you're not standing outside all night. You've done this before. But as you watch this and you see the path and you hear officials, when does Brian Ensign go indoors tonight?
Let's just see real quick. Hold on 1 second. He's just popping in. Are you okay? You're okay? Yeah. Are you going to come out? You should probably come on land. No. Okay. Yeah, he's not going to come out. In terms of us, sorry, again, we just kind of keep looking at him. But yeah. I think I would get nervous and probably start moving if the water starts rising. I mean, we can handle the rain and the wind. We can get next to a big building or something like that. But I think the water is what, kind of makes you nervous when you know you need to kind of move because you can't really escape the water. So far, so good on that front, though.
You're a good man trying to get Lieutenant Dan to get out of there. Brian, Luis, stay safe to both of you tonight. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Blake.
You got it. All right. Meantime, back here in Washington, President Biden today held a briefing with FEMA officials from the National Hurricane Center, along with the Vice President, Kamala Harris. Now, during the live stream event, the president took a moment to criticize Donald Trump, while Harris was asked about misinformation.
For the last few weeks, there's been a reckless, irresponsible, and relentless promotion of disinformation and outright lies. Former President Trump has led the onslaught of lies.
We need to clear up.
Now, out on the campaign trail today in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump opened his event by criticizing the administration's response to Hurricane Helene.
She's just led the worst rescue operation in history, the worst ever, they say. They had no money. You know where they gave the money? To illegal immigrants coming in, many of whom are killers.
Back with me now, Chris Steyerwalt, host of The Hill Sunday, Kelly Meyer, NewsNation Washington correspondent. Kelly, we've now seen President Biden twice today. He held this live stream event at around noon here on the East Coast, and then was in the Roosevelt Room of the White House about an hour ago, giving more remarks, and yet again, he went after Donald Trump.
And it's notable and noticeable as I cover the White House over the past 2 weeks, how it's changed. We were talking about this for folks at home before the first Hurricane Helene. President Biden was in Rehoboth and came back early to get briefed on that and then came back to the White House. Kamala Harris, she was in Las Vegas fundraising and then came back, so they both were in Washington to be briefed. But this is a complete change from what we saw for the response to Hurricane Helene to what we're seeing now with President Biden almost out there daily, even double, twice a day, to talk about what they're doing. So it's a good thing because we're seeing them out there and talking with Americans and those that might be impacted. But where were they 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago, there was a Category 4 storm, Helene, that ripped through the southeast, Chris. The president then was criticized. Where were you? What are you doing? Clearly, there is a much different shift out of the White House now as he's out in front and the vice president out in front.
Americans today, let me just be very grumpy for a moment.
Go for it.
And say that the idea that things aren't okay unless our great national father comes out and tells us on television, that's not the president's job. That's not what we need a president for. We don't need a president to be our consoler in chief or make us feel better or tell us everything's going to be okay. We're Americans. We're Americans. We can do it. If you want to feel better about the country we live in, look at the extraordinary. We talk about Hurricane Helene. I've heard Democrats blame Republicans for causing global warming. Mm-hmm. I've heard Republicans say the craziest stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, just unbelievable, to the point that Donald Trump's fellow Republicans are begging him to stop lying about this stuff because it's making it harder to get the work done. I've seen all of this. Lost in all of this is, if you read my colleague Kevin Williamson at the Dispatch writing about it, look at the great coverage that our crews in North Carolina have done. Extraordinary capability, extraordinary humanity, extraordinary endurance, Americans helping each other, taking care of each other. And they're going to do it in Florida again. And the idea that what we do in this country is sit around and wait for whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump or whoever to tell us what's going to happen, whether we're going to be okay, is hogwash.
We were 3 weeks away, or 2 weeks away, whatever, 3 weeks away from a presidential election. Are you surprised it devolved to this?
No. Am I surprised that in the silly season, I mean, we're 28 days or 27 days away.
27, yeah.
We're 27 days away from election. This is what they call the silly season. Yep. And it's always going to be preposterous. And in season 3 of the Trump show, you know it's going to be wild, right? Because you've got to top the previous 2 seasons. You got to keep hitting it. But I hope that at their core, at their heart of hearts, that Americans understand that they can count on themselves, they can count on their neighbors, they can count on these communities. And when you see the excellent work of Republican and Democratic local, state officials who care about this and are doing this work, the help that you need will come from closest to you. It will not come because somebody holds a press conference in Washington.
One of the remarkable things we have seen on to the other side of this is, Kelly, you've got Joe Biden and Ron DeSantis sort of hand in hand right now.
And he just said that in his remarks earlier. He actually got a question asking him if DeSantis should be taking Harris's calls. And he kind of dodged it and just said, I'm glad that I'm talking with Ron DeSantis. I told him to call me directly if he has any problems, and he kept it very diplomatic and said, let's just handle this the way we need to. He didn't answer the question on
Kelly
Harris.
Meyer, thank you very much. Chris, other side of the break. On the other side of the break, we continue our coverage. This is a live look right now of Naples. This is basically as far southeast as you can go there in Florida. They will get some of this storm. What form? Of course, that area has been devastated in the recent years with hurricanes. And tonight, of course, they are watching Milton. Stay with us here on The Hill. All right, welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. Full panel here joins me now. Samantha Dravis, former Trump administration official. Back is Chris Steyerwalt, Julia Manchester, Adam Hodge, former spokesperson over at the DNC. Hello to you all. You were just telling me your mom lives in Sarasota.
Yeah, she's in Bradenton, a couple miles away from Sarasota, and so we're hoping she's hunkered down, and hopefully she's got someone staying with her. Hopefully, fingers crossed, all the prayers that she gets out of it.
All right, so we continue to keep our eyes on Hurricane Milton there in Florida. This, of course, comes 2 weeks after the devastation in western North Carolina. That area continues to struggle after Hurricane Helene killed over 100 people as a result of that storm. Residents still dealing with the devastation, including destroyed homes, collapsed roads as well. Within the past hour here, the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, visited Asheville, North Carolina, one of the hardest hit areas there in that state. The Speaker saying this has been the worst disaster that he's ever seen. Keep in mind, he's from Louisiana. And he called out the federal government's response. Donald Trump also today making comments as well.
There's concern that, the federal response was a little too slow, and that needs to be addressed.
She's just led the worst rescue operation in history in North Carolina. The worst.
Back at the White House today, President Biden gave remarks about an hour ago on the storm and also used the opportunity to take a swipe at Trump.
I just find it, I've used the phrase more than I've used it ever in my whole career, un-American. It's un-American. It's not who the hell we are.
Two different responses from each political party. They got to cut this out?
Look, there should be no politics with the storm, right? I mean, you've seen the governor of North Carolina, governor of Georgia, governor of Florida even saying the federal government, like, they're doing what we need them to do. They've given Diane Creswell a ton of credit, head of FEMA, for helping out. And $344 million already been given out from FEMA aid, $61 million in North Carolina alone, right? Like, that's in the first week and a half after the first storm. And they've been clear about what's going on in Florida, getting everybody ready, and they pre-positioned the resources to help recover from Milton. So they're doing what they can.
Cut it out?
Well, I disagree with President Biden. I don't think it's un-American to criticize your government where criticism is due. And I think two things can be true. Yes, there's been a lot of disinformation regarding the federal response, but the federal response has also been inadequate in many ways. And I think one of the things the speaker pointed out is Americans are frustrated when they see, although there are two different streams of funding, millions of dollars of FEMA resources and personnel going to resettle illegal immigrants instead of helping Americans with disaster recovery.
So big budget, and that is a very, very, very small part of it. It is a part of the budget, but money has not been directed as a result.
But I think the frustration is, why is the Federal Emergency Management Agency that's supposed to be responding to Americans in a disaster, which, we're 12 days out from this, and we've got people in Western North Carolina who still need to be rescued. It's a terrible situation, and I think there's some criticism due there.
What's Washington going to deal with, Julia? Because obviously the lawmakers are home for the election, but you're going to have two massive major storms in just a matter of hours here.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, in December, for example, I think it's going to take a while, to obviously sort of unpack what happened here. I think a lot of it depends on what happens with Milton, how much destruction there is. Exactly. But I'm curious to see how this impacts, how this could politically impact the funding battle, for example, that's coming up in December. I mean, they're going to be back in. It's going to be after the election. There could be a lot of raw political emotion there. So I think there's going to be a collision course.
Joe Biden, this marginalized figure, and shunted aside by his party, and mad, and you hear him mad, and he's mad at Donald Trump. He obviously shouldn't be distracting from the discussion by talking about who's un-American and what's un-American. That's not right. But you got to feel for the guy, because you saw Mike Johnson do it there. Donald Trump says something that's not true. He says, many people are saying, who's saying, that this is the worst thing that has ever happened to anybody in of all time. It's the worst, and Kamala Harris did it. So it's not true. I remember Hurricane Katrina. I remember some real Lulus in the past. No one is saying that. So Donald Trump says it. And then Mike Johnson goes down and he says, some people have questioned whether or not this is really, really bad and we should look into it. So there's this informational laundering that goes on where somebody like Mike Johnson wants to placate Trump, get it right, and still say the right stuff. And I understand Biden's frustration, but that's not the right venue for Biden to vent and show how upset he is.
But it is harmful for people on the ground if they're scared to go ask FEMA for help, right?
But Donald Trump's own party is begging him to stop, right? Including conservative members of Congress are begging the former president, please stop doing this. You're making it work. Joe Biden doesn't need to do it. This does not help for Joe Biden to use that platform to go out and then be crabby at Trump.
There's this interesting dynamic where Kamala Harris went after Ron DeSantis, and Joe Biden said, actually, no, he's doing a great job down there.
Exactly. This is a time for people to be grown up, and it's very frustrating for people because we're close to the election, and nobody wants to think that they've let one molecule of potential attack and optimizing for anger between now and Election Day. But people can take a day off. They can take a day off.
Look, I think Florida and the situation in Western North Carolina are different. I think there is some criticism due. The many people who are saying the federal government's response has been inadequate are the people on the ground.
No, that's not what Donald Trump said. What Donald Trump said was that this is the worst recovery response ever, and that Kamala Harris led it.
Perhaps that's his opinion.
But that's not what he said. He said that many people are, because that's what he always says. He says many people are saying.
Well, many people on the ground are saying that the federal government is nowhere to be found. And that's not coming from Trump. It's coming from videos of the victims.
The federal government was there to have a press conference for the Speaker of the House.
I'm glad that they're having a press conference. I think we're 12 days out and there's still people that need to be rescued that haven't been rescued. And so there are questions. Again, I think the Florida response is different than the situation in Western North Carolina.
And here we are, 27 days before an election. The reality is tonight, that there are people still suffering in western North Carolina, and you've got a Category 3 storm now barreling on Florida. There will be widespread power. There will be widespread flooding. There will be widespread damage. You hope there will not be widespread death. In the past, history has shown us whenever you have storms this massive, it's what happens. And it's why officials there in Florida were saying yesterday, get out now. And it's why officials in Florida were saying earlier today, if you haven't gotten out, stay there. You need to hunker down. It's 6:53 here on the East Coast tonight, and what we know is in the last 2 weeks there have been 2 major storms. One that is about to hit a major population center in this country. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, joins me on the other side of the break. Welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. Live look right now, Reading, Pennsylvania, where former President Donald Trump will take the stage at some point here in the upcoming hour. The rally, of course, comes as there's a major hurricane, Hurricane Milton, making landfall in Florida this evening. Host of On Balance, Leland Vittert, joins me now. This is a tricky, interesting dynamic that both of these candidates have to sort of walk through here in the middle of October.
To the West Coast, and it's not just tonight as the storm is hitting, right? The last thing you want as a presidential candidate is the split screen of you talking and rallying with people suffering. So it's not so much tonight as we see the storm coming ashore, but it's going to be in the coming days when there is people being rescued, when there is people homeless, when there is destruction and devastation, and you're at a political rally.
I'm surprised there's a rally tonight. Trump canceled the one yesterday because it was supposed to be in Florida, so obviously that's a no-brainer. You surprised he's doing this tonight in PA?
I don't think tonight is the issue, and you're going to see him come out, most likely, talk about the storm. And now, for better or for worse,